Hey there, this is Miriam Schulman. Welcome to the Inspiration Place. You are listening to episode number 384. Today's guest is a national media contributor, popular speaker, and award-winning educator who believes that creativity is the best tool we have for exploring, adapting, and bringing forth new ways to thrive in our ever-changing world. As co-founder and creative director of Jewish Studio Project, she has worked with thousands of organizational and communal leaders, educators, and clergy across the country to access and activate their inherent creativity. Her writing can be found in scholarly as well as mainstream publications, and she is the author of The Place of All Possibility, Cultivating Creativity Through Ancient Jewish Wisdom. Please welcome to the Inspiration Place, Adina Allen. Well, hello, Adina, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So the reason I invited you is because I love how you bridge Jewish wisdom and the creative process. So that's where we're going to center our conversation today, how making art can be a form of spiritual practice. Sound good?
Amazing.
All right. So I have some questions in case I need to cheat and look at my questions, but I think our conversation's really going to flow. Starting with very Old Testament Genesis about creativity, and we'll use the G word, God.
Awesome. And invite all listeners to replace the G word God, as I say in the book, with any word that works for you, because I know that word, just to stay from the outset, has laden with so many things that we might not feel connected to or that resonate for us.
And can I just say that even the writers of the Torah didn't really initially intend anyway. I think it was, and you know more about this than me, so you can butt in and correct me. It's really the translation of the King James Bible that made it much more anthropomorphic and a patriarchal. But before that, it was more inclusive, wasn't it? The concept of God.
Totally. And one of the things I love about the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, and Jewish tradition is that there's hundreds of names for God. And I believe part of the work of engaging creative process as a spiritual practice is for each of us to be able to bring down and into the world the name, meaning the attributes of God, of the divine, of the creative source that are most needed in our world right now.
It's what I need right now.
And so even in Torah, we see countless names for God and each of the ancestors calling on specific names that they needed at specific times. And just thinking of each of us as vessels through which the new iterations of the divine name that are needed in our world today can be brought forth. So I believe that's something open to all of us, regardless of background or tradition or, belief. And so just wanted to start by saying that. But I've gotten really excited about Genesis, even just the opening couple lines of the Hebrew Bible, as this incredible template for creativity for us. So maybe I could just share a couple of things from that. And
Yes.
great.
Yes,
So,
please. Okay.
and I'll say Torah, that's what in Jewish tradition we call it. You could call it the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, whatever name you have for it. But it begins with, and I'll say the Hebrew and then I'll translate it, Bereshit bara Elohim. So often translated as, in the beginning, God created. So first of all, just to say, to double click on, the first verb of the Torah is create. God's first act is to create, is to be the creative force. And a few verses later, we're told that human beings are made B'Tselem Elohim, in the divine image. And that's used to prove all kinds of things about the worth and importance of each and every human life. And another thing I think it means, though, is that if God is creator, creative force, the creative source, and we're made in that image, then each and every one of us are endowed with creativity simply by being human. It's not something we have to earn. It's not something we need to get a degree in. It's imbued in us simply by being human beings.
He's a creative. I'm a creative.
And I would say being in touch with our creativity is a powerful way that we access God, the divine creative source, again, whatever word we want to call that.
Okay, and I just want to pause you here because so many people think there's some sort of art fairy that makes some people talented and some not. And can you say a few things about that?
Totally. And I'll say I feel very blessed. I got to grow up, I say, with an art studio as the biggest room in my suburban house growing up.
Oh, like my children did. Hey, I wrote Artpreneur because I wanted every creative person to stop waiting for permission and start seeing their creativity as sacred. And if you've been enjoying this conversation, you're going to love the audible version of Artpreneur. And by the way, it's not just me reading. We've included clips from my podcast guests, all those voices you've enjoyed hearing on the show. Guests like Amy Porterfield, Jennifer Kem, Michael Shine, Jeffrey Shaw, and more. And they're each sharing their wisdom right inside the chapters, but in their own voice. Think of it as the difference between a single storyteller and a full immersive experience, like moving from reading scripture to hearing it sung out loud. And the best news is for the month of November, you can find it on sale. Go to schulmanart.com/audible. And now let's get back to the show.
But it was really this space for my mom is Pat Allen. She's a world leader in the field of art therapy. And I grew up with art making being offered to me just as a way that we get in touch with ourselves, that we work out challenging things in our life, that we get messy and find out what's going on in our inner world. And so I feel really grateful to have had that. And I don't think that's something that most people get to have as a child. And so it wasn't about like, can you make this accurate representation of this figure? And to say for sure, there's like such a need for fine art skills and to be honed in a particular art form, and in the public sphere changes the way we think and feel and see things. And to engage with art materials doesn't require a specific talent or degree. And I think so often the only way, maybe after preschool, that we're really invited or allowed to do that is once we're told we have like artistic aptitude. And I can't tell you, I work with thousands of adults around the country every year. And I ask people who was told by their third grade art teacher or whoever that they were not creative. The whole room raises their hand. My sister's the creative one. My stuff was never hung on the wall. I was told to mouth the words in the back of choir because I don't have a good voice.
I'm not that creative. Maybe you could help.
So just to name like exactly what you're saying, there's so much creative trauma. And I think that serves to cut us off from a deep and powerful, a source of power within each of us.
Yeah, a lot of people give me pushback. When I wrote my book, Artpreneur, I said that talent really doesn't have a lot to do with your success. And people really pushed back on it, especially when I was going on my book tour and being interviewed by non-creatives, like, well, but I'm not creative, or like, how can you say that? I was like, you got to separate skills from creativity, and there's a difference.
Totally. And to say like there are creative skills too that we can all access and hone, which I'm sure, this is a part of your work as well. Like I use the phrase like taking it off the page. So if we're working on a particular art in the studio, maybe painting, it's like we're painting and it's about the painting, but it's also about how do we take the skills of going up against a blank canvas, getting to a point, as anybody who's ever worked with any kind of art has gotten to, of like, I hate this sucks. And then you keep going and watch it transform, right? Staying with it, noticing what's arising, like working through that frustration, all of those things, right? Those are things for me that come up in my work life, in my parenting life, in my partnership with my husband, right? So
you're like Superwoman.
They're all skills, creative skills that we can develop that apply to everything, not just making art, but making art as a way to develop those skills.
One thing I've heard you be interviewed on, and I'm assuming it's in your book as well, is that whole idea that your mother taught you about, did you make art about this yet? And I think that's an important concept for both artists and non-artists, but artists who are listening who maybe they associate their art with just, this is what they do, this is their profession, this is who they are, versus using it themselves as a form of therapy, for lack of a better word, or processing their emotions.
Art therapy, creative expression.
Totally. Yeah, I can just say, just to use that phrase, growing up, I would come to my mom. I write about it in the book when I was like, preteen, and what should I do about this friend or this thing that feels like an existential, issue, and so upset and so beside myself. And she'd just say, well, have you made art about it yet? And as I always say, it was super frustrating. It was really annoying. I did not appreciate that question at the time, although eventually I think I would go into the studio, especially because my mom would be in there making art, not trying to get me to do a project with her, not instructing me, just in there tending to her own creative fire, which then drew me towards that room and wanting to do that myself. And now that's become the tagline of Jewish Studio Project. Have you made art about it yet? As a question for all of us. And I think we can see in a society with so much divisiveness, polarization, fear, anger, all of these things, that art making is really there as this powerful resource to move beyond or underneath or around the intellectual, rational mind and discover things that exist within us that we can't yet put words to, that we don't yet know are there. And so I think, we know about multimodal learning and all these things we're talking about more in society, but it's really, like you said, for all of us, whether we consider ourselves an artist or not.
I think it's actually in some ways, and I would love to know if you agree with this or not. I think in some ways it may be harder for people who do have a professional art form to do this as a form of therapy because you're too tied to the selling of it. Pressure. Or the kind of art you produce as an artist, and how to break free from, I'm making art that needs to be monetized or sold or part of my repertoire, part of my collection, versus art I make just for me because this is something I need to do for myself. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, totally. We have so many working artists who are part of Jewish Studio Project who I think have discovered it as being meaningful for exactly that reason, that it makes sense that you have to hone a particular form. You're recognized for a particular thing and you continue to reproduce that because that's what people know you as and that's what sells. And like, that makes sense. It's not any shade on anyone for that. But to give ourselves as artists space where we can really just be free, play, explore, let other new ideas come to the surface, even if they're not going to go in a museum or go in our shop or go on our website. And I would say yet, right? They're the seeds of maybe the next creative flowering that wants to come. And I think my art form is sermons, like Jewish writing about Torah. And I have the things, right, about creativity or other things that I've like said a lot that still have, meaning for me, but they're the things people want to hear that I talk about. But when I do this creative process of Jewish studio process of text learning, art making, writing, and just letting new ideas come to the fore, I get to discover like what else is there, which then keeps me more alive to the work.
Okay. I want to move our conversation back a little bit more towards the connection with ancient Jewish wisdom, because I think we went off into a lot of different tangents. So we don't consider our discussion on Genesis yet complete, I'm assuming, right? Okay, say more.
No, I would love to go back to that.
All right, I'll be waiting for it.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we started with the first verb of Torah being create, and God is creative force, and us all, every human being being created in that image, being endowed with. We say we are all created creative. I think even just these opening lines have more to offer us. It says that the world was tohu vavohu. It's this interesting pair of Hebrew words, which usually are translated as chaos and void. So before God began to create, the world was chaos and void. And often the interpretations, or probably how most people have heard it, is there was nothing and then God created and the world came into being. But what I actually think is more powerful is to read what the text actually says, which is there was chaos and void, darkness, and this like depth of water. And then God began to create from there. And so I think all of those elements are symbols for us that exist in our own personal lives and in our collective life as a people. There is darkness, there's depth, there's chaos and void, this sort of like murky unknown. And when we use that as the raw material for our creative process, we're able to bring forth new worlds in the same way God does in the Torah, as opposed to trying to excise, wall off, push away, anything like that. So I really think all of those psychological, spiritual feelings are a resource for us. And I think the Torah gives us a template for how to interact with that. And I want to say one other thing, which is if the first verb is bara, which is to create, the second verb is mirachafet, which is that God flutters or hovers over those materials. And I want to lift that up to say, first of all, the only other place where that word is used in Torah is about a mother bird fluttering or hovering over her young. And so there's something very like tender to me and sweet about it. And to me gives us an invitation for how we can be around our materials, that there's a stage of just fluttering, hovering, coming into contact with, coming into energetic relationship with what's there materially, like physically, but also materially like within ourselves as we start to listen for what wants to arise, as opposed to, I think, traditional interpretations of these verses, which say God came, God had a plan, God executed it step by step, imposing God's will on these inert materials. And I think it's much more of a dynamic co-creative process. And I love that read is also there in the text.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, there's a lot of metaphor and story about how things didn't quite go as God planned. So there is room to embrace that imperfection in even the divine creation. Okay, you know what I want to talk about next is how do we define creativity as part of our spiritual DNA rather than just like a fun hobby that we have?
Yeah, I think that is such a disservice that's been done to this word and to art as like, I remember when we first started the organization 10 years ago, and we work only with adults. And part of that was because we would set up materials, we'd have the workshop, and adults would walk in and say like, oh, this must be the room to drop my kid off for Hebrew school. Like, this isn't the room for me. Like, there's glitter, there's color, there's whatever. And just how sad that is. Creativity is the most powerful resource that we have, I think, for interacting with the world, for changing the world, for figuring out what's going on inside ourselves. And I think to reduce it to something light, something, fun, it can be fun, but as any of us know who, tap into our creativity on a regular basis or make art, it's hard, it's arduous, it's deep, it's profound, it's transformative, and it shapes us into the people that we are. And so part of my life's work, which it sounds like yours too, is like reclaiming that word and reclaiming what's been lost as it's been downgraded to something like, and I will say, I think there's like misogyny in that as well. Creativity in that way is often thought of like a woman thing or like a craft thing, a girl's thing. And I think that all takes away from what's truly the power of it for all of us.
And I would argue that creativity is the number one skill you need for business.
Really?
Really, really.
Even if you do not have what you consider a creative business, especially right now in the world, in the era of AI, where people are having trouble adapting what creativity is. What Darwin said was not the survival of the fittest, but was the species that was most able to adapt would survive. In other words, be creative. So the businesses that are continue to thrive 2026 and beyond are the ones who understand, yes, the world's changing. It's always been changing, and using that creativity to evolve in a changing world.
We must adapt.
100%. And I would say, I mean, at least from my vantage point, the way it's also a spiritual practice, which is what we were talking about at the start, that it's not just like, how do I adapt and yes, keep making money, be successful, all those things, but like, how do I both tap into what is happening in the world and what's happening within me and where the nexus point between those two things are? Because I think that's how a business is most successful, when we get to stay alive to the core thing that lights us up, right? And we get to bring our unique gifts to something that the world uniquely needs. And that continues to shift and change, and staying alive and awake to that is the creative process.
If you've been looking to turn your creativity into a sustainable business while keeping the soul of the reason that you became an artist in the first place, you're going to love the Artpreneur experience on Audible. Because it's not just a book. It's an immersive creative journey. In between my stories and strategies, you'll actually hear the voices of my podcast guests. Think thought leaders like Jennifer Kem, Amy Porterfield, Michael Shine, and Jeffrey Shaw. They're each sharing their insights in their own words. It's kind of like the difference between listening to Jim Dale or Stephen Fry read Harry Potter or stepping right into Hogwarts itself. The Audible version of Artpreneur is on sale all throughout November. So go grab it at schulmanart.com/audible and let your next creative awakening begin. And now let's get back to the show. Okay, but now let's talk about holy creativity.
Yes, and I feel, just as I got to grow up in a studio, I feel grateful I got to go to rabbinical school for 6 years and really dive into this. And another part of my life's mission is just making this way of relating to Torah as a creative project more available to more people.
Thank you for that.
Because it's not that interesting to have something that just tells you, right, what to do and what the laws are. It's like, okay, that can offer something. But like, the reason I think Torah has continued to be so alive and dynamic all these years for so many people, we call it in Jewish tradition an Eitz Chaim, a tree of life, a living, breathing tree. And the only way that that tree stays alive is through new input and nutrients coming into it, which I believe is all of our creative engagement with it. And I love that Jewish tradition, for those who don't know, is a tradition that holds many different interpretations of a particular verse or even word alongside one another. So there's a new incredible website called Sefaria that has a compendium of all traditional Jewish texts. And you can literally double click on a word and see, 10 different commentators across different centuries and what they've said about that word. And I believe that all of us, honestly, whether we're Jewish or not, are invited into that ongoing project of creative interpretation and reinterpretation. And that's how those words both stay alive and continue to imbue meaning into our lives. And I think that's the biggest service that we can give to this text, is to continue to add our interpretations of how it speaks to us today.
Okay, so with that in mind, who would you look to as creative archetypes in the Torah?
Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, first of all, God. Just to say, I know we said, there's so many names, but just for listeners who don't know, I just want to lift up two of the most important names. One is Yud He Vav He, which is 4 impronounceable letters that are basically like the breath of life going in and out. And the other name, which is how God self-identifies to Moses in the famous episode of the burning bush when Moses is about to go free the people from Egypt. And Moses says, who should I tell them is sending me? And God says, tell them Ehie Asher Ehie is sending you to them. That means tell them I will be that which I will be is sending you to them. That's how God self-identifies, as the process of becoming, as a creative process itself. And so I think that is incredible, that God is not identifying there as solid, rock, soldier, whatever, something sturdy and solid. It's like, I am the process of change and becoming. And that is actually what's going to take you out of this narrow, restricted place into this open, expansive place. So that's one. I think about Abraham, who God commands, Lach lecha, go forth, leave this place where you are, your father's house, the land that you know, where you were brought up, and like go into the unknown and know that you will be shown and discover what you're meant to see as you go on that journey, but you're not going to get to see it beforehand. So I think that's a great invitation for us. I think about Jacob, who wrestles with the angel and who is transformed and whose name transforms from Jacob into Yisrael, one who literally struggles with God and is changed by that encounter in the night. So I think almost every character is a creative archetype for us. I'll just add one more since I haven't said any women. So many, and I didn't prepare this, but thinking about Hannah, who is longing for a child and prays to God, like muttering under her breath, just like praying, even when her husband's like, aren't you just fine with me? I'm here. Like, aren't I enough for you? And the priest thinks she's drunk, but Hannah nurtures her own spiritual creative process in connecting with God. And that's what allows her life and her story to transform and shift. So I think all of those, and literally every character, but just start with those.
Okay, and I'm just going to share a very personal story. It's kind of more for my listeners, but it's also for you too. So my grandmother, Hannah, was named Hannah, and she passed away about a week before when we read that story in the Torah. And then a few weeks later, I learned I was pregnant. And my grandmother always wanted a boy for me because my father, her son, passed away tragically when I was very young, when I was 5 and he was 30. And so not that pregnancy, but I had my daughter, and I remember calling my grandmother and saying, it's a girl. And she so wanted a boy so badly that she was like, who is this? Like, she would not believe that I was having a girl. So longer story shortened. So I became pregnant right after she passed away. And yes, I had a boy, and we named him Seth Hanan after Hannah. You know, while he lived in the US, he always went by Seth, but now that he lives in Israel, he goes by Hanan. So that is my own little personal story that I wanted to share. And our Moyle, when I told him this story, he said, well, when somebody dies, they send an angel or a messenger to heaven. And it was like her wish.
She got her wish.
Like the story of Hannah in the Torah, who was wishing for a son. So that is my son.
That is amazing. Wow,
yeah.
I'm so glad I named Hannah, and then we got to bring
Yeah, so that was just like a little personal story I've never shared before. Oh, you know what I want to talk about? The building of the Tabernacle. Is there something that we can chat about that in terms of the importance of creativity?
I mean, yeah, a few things. So this was like the central place where God's presence was going to be accessed, right? So many skilled artisans brought their crafts there. So that, but everyone contributed to its construction. It was a full communal endeavor. And the text says everyone whose hearts were so willing. And so I think all of us can tap into the place within us, right? Where is our willing heart, and what can we bring and offer from that place? And that the world needs that, whatever it is. And I just love that the Mishkan gives us that beautiful phrase.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful.
And I would say that it also leads to like this abundance mindset, right? At the end of that, Moses is like, okay, like enough, like we have enough stuff. Like everyone's willing hearts brought so much that in a world that teaches us to live in such scarcity, actually, when we tap into our willing hearts and our loving hearts and what's there, there is abundance and enough for all.
Okay, so this question now is more geared to people who do identify with the Judeo-Christian tradition, but I know there's many people who feel intimidated by Bible stories or Torah stories. And how can creativity help make these ancient stories feel more personal and alive?
Yeah, I guess I would just say the invitation to say, like, the way you've been taught these stories or the way dominant culture gives us these stories isn't the only form of these stories. And that's something, again, I feel really blessed to have gotten to go to rabbinical school and learn how to dissect Hebrew.
I wish I knew it.
and take apart these stories and feel empowered to add my voice. But part of my mission is to really open that charge and invitation up to everybody. Yes, there's a version of God that is like dominant and commanding and domineering and things we might not really connect with. But there's also other stories and other versions of God as this like co-creative, playful, exploratory. And so part of what I do in my book is try to lift up those aspects of God and tell those stories. And I would say, whether I say this at the beginning of the book, but whether we quote unquote like believe in these stories or not, right? Is this how the world came to be? Is this scientifically true? Whatever. They are the stories that form so much of the foundation of our life, certainly here in America, right? Like Adam and Eve, how women are treated or perceived, the work week based on, the cycle of creation and Shabbat. Like there's so many things in our justice system, et cetera, that I think we would be well served to bring our attention to them and lift up the interpretations that feel most alive and resonant. And so that's part of a Jewish Studio Project, what we're trying to give people the skills and invitation and encouragement to do.
Wow. Thank you for that.
All right, so this episode is dropping the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So, with gratitude in mind, there is one prayer that's actually the beginning of most prayers. This is Baruch atah Adonai, which translates, "Blessed are you, our Lord, our God." That's how we translate it. And growing up, I always thought that we were blessing God. And now, more recently, I've learned that's not actually what it means. Just so people know, and also Adina, I didn't make this up. I learned this from Rabbi David Allen. It's basically when we're saying, "Blessed are you," we're not saying, "Bless God." God doesn't need to be blessed. We're saying God is abundant, and we're recognizing the abundance of God, which God being one, all of us are God, and how everything is abundant. All right.
Perfectly said.
So interpreting that differently kind of shifted my perspective. And then also within, I think it's the Amidah, the prayer that we say, "God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob," and then also the matriarchs. What we are saying there is that everybody has a personal relationship to what we call God, like how we started this whole podcast off with. So you can add, Adina, whatever you want to that conversation.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I think we get into this trap of, right, this duality of like, there's God and there's us. And why did God let this happen, right? I don't think that's necessarily a fruitful question. I don't believe in like a puppeteering God that's making this happen or making that happen. I think it's exactly as you were just so beautifully articulating it. Like we each are imbued. There's like this larger collective consciousness, energy, spirit, and part of it is in each of us, and it goes back to that greater, spirit when we die. And so each of us are an embodiment of that. And I want to tie that into what we were just talking to about Torah and interpretation. There's a beautiful text that says, at the moment of revelation, when God appeared at Sinai, God appeared as a picture visible from all angles, and we each gazed upon it and it gazed back on each of us. So first of all, I love that it has this like art element in it, but also to say, right, just to stay with that image for a moment, each of us gazed upon it. So we each have our particular vantage point, every single person. And that vantage point is true and it is powerful and it is needed. And it's only one vantage point of, right, we need every vantage point around that whole image to get the full picture. And so I think that lifts up both how each of us are needed and how we all need each other.
We need each other.
So beautiful. Any last words about gratefulness that we can close this podcast with, seeing that we are in the time of Thanksgiving here in the US?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things I was thinking about. One is often gratitude feels like this thing that we're like commanded to feel. Sometimes I feel like resentful, right? It's like, be grateful, just be grateful. It's not that hard. Be grateful. And then your life will change and you'll be happy. And you're not saying this. I think that's a message in society often.
Yeah,
and gratitude is hard and like life is hard. I'm sure many listeners are going through very difficult things. We all always are in our lives.
Yes.
I'm really not that good.
And so maybe just going back to an invitation around creative process of letting, I say the page can hold it all, but whatever medium you feel comfortable or able or invited to work in, to really let it hold whatever emotions you're experiencing. And I think once we allow those to be fully expressed and felt, gratitude comes naturally and fills us.
It does.
We feel reconnected to ourselves. There's not something blocking that energetic flow anymore. So I think rather than just cultivate gratitude, I think it's like tend to the real emotions that are there, befriend them, give them space, and then, eventually will transform to gratitude and love and all the things we want to feel. So that's one thing. And just to say, I think that feels even more heightened around the holidays, which I think sort of start intensely with Thanksgiving and go all the way through, right? We feel loss more during the holidays, distance from family, sometimes all those things. So just acknowledging that and inviting people to make space for that. And the other thing I think a lot about is like hosting at this time. A lot of us are hosting and being hosted, and thinking about as generous and gregarious and welcoming as we are to host, to think about like ourselves as hosting emotions and hosting feelings and being that opening and welcoming to our own self and our own emotions.
Beautiful.
All right. So if you like what Adina had to say today, you must check out her book, The Place of All Possibility, Cultivating Creativity Through Ancient Jewish Wisdom. We'll make sure we've linked the book for you in our show notes.
I would just say this was a lovely conversation, and we do a free monthly program. If anyone ever wants to join online and just practice this form of art making that I've been talking about, we would love to have you. And just so lovely to talk to you today.
So we will link to that in the show notes as well. This is episode number 384. All right. Thank you so much, my friends, for joining me here today. I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Until then, stay inspired. Bye for now.